Today's reading follows on directly from last week, John chapter 14 and verses 15 to 21. Jesus is still in the room with the 11 disciples now, talking to them about what's going to happen, the events that are going to unfold, his imminent death and departure, their own reaction to that. And we remember from last week that prior to that reading, he had said to them, "Now I give to you a new commandment, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. If you have love for one another, then everyone will know that you are my disciples." And last week we learnt how Jesus was saying to the disciples, in really easy to understand language, again, that Jesus was God. Jesus was God. And if they've seen Jesus, they've seen God. He goes on to say, "If you love me, you will obey my commandments. I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper who will stay with you forever. He is the Spirit who reveals the truth about God. The world cannot receive him because it cannot see him or know him. But you know him because he remains with you and is in you. When I go, you will not be left all alone. I will come back to you. In a little while, the world will see me no more, but you will see me. And because I live, you also will live. When that day comes, you will know that I am in my Father, and that you are in me, just as I am in you. Whoever accepts my commandments and obeys them is the one who loves me. My Father will love whoever loves me. I too will love him and reveal myself to him." In that reading then, Jesus talks about the commandment again to love one another. Whoever loves me will obey my commandments. And in 21, whoever accepts my commandments and obeys them is the one who loves me. It talks of the relationship that people have with God, which is one of love in response to grace freely given. God came to us before we even knew God, before we could possibly ever earn God's love, and God loves us unconditionally, universally, eternally. This is the promise and the wonderful good news that Jesus came to share. In relation to the gift of the Spirit, then, a word translated in our different Bibles as advocate, counselor, helper, guide, support, there is a real sense of something or someone who walks alongside us, who is always there for us, who will always fight our corner, who unconditionally loves us, who we can always turn to, who is our guide and is our best friend. Attributes of the Spirit. An interesting concept, because for us in our material world, concepts of spirit doesn't really mean a great deal, and it's hard to convince people of the existence of something that they can't see. Or is it? I've been doing a lot of reading recently about quantum physics. It's something that I'm fascinated and thrilled by. And if you read contemporary theories to explain the world around us, understanding that absolutely everything that we can see and experience is made of atoms, and within atoms there are particles, of course, and within those particles there are other particles, and how the whole world is built up of this tiny, tiny matter. Quantum physics attempts to explain the very, very strange behavior of particles at the subatomic level. Extraordinary behavior, like how they can sometimes behave like waves and yet at the same time behave like particles. How two particles can be linked and know about the other particle, even if it's on the other side of the universe, a distance that would take light billions of years to travel. Those two particles can communicate with one another and change their state instantaneously in a way that defies all logic, all reason, and all science. And how those particles behave in bizarre ways. And yet if you observe them, they stop behaving in bizarre ways. Quantum physics is a strange and weird world. But it goes to explain that when we get into a science about the universe and the things that we see around us and the things we experience, there too are no particular absolutes. We have theories for how things behave, but we can't experience them. The very nature of quantum physics is that you cannot experience it. Experiencing it is to stop it. That's not to make a rather strange defense for the spirit, but when Jesus talks about those who have the spirit within them, who've experienced the spirit, they will love in response. Then that takes us back to something we can more easily understand. If you love somebody or something, you will do something for them. How you express that love will vary. Sometimes it will be in making them a cup of tea, sometimes by stopping doing that annoying thing that you do all the time, just so they're not made angry. Sometimes you'll do things for them. You'll go out of your way for them. You'll remember them. You'll think of them. You'll do things that make them happy because that is your intent. Your desire is to make them happy because you love them. And so it is with God. The gift of the Spirit, whilst you can't see it, you can't bottle it, you can't encourage it to happen, you can't manufacture it. If you've experienced God's love in your heart, then there is an outworking. There is a response. There is a tangible sign, as Jesus said in that preceding chapter. If you have love for one another, then everyone will know that you are my disciples. If you have love for one another, everyone will know that you are my disciples. And that is the key of the Christian faith. It is an experience of God, a relationship with God, which defines our words and our actions. It changes who we are, and it puts our behavior and our actions at variance with what the world would think of as normal and acceptable, to something that is transformed, to be based entirely on selfless love for God and for God's people. And that is a glorious and wonderful, wonderful thing. It's just interesting that as adults, as grown-ups, as we tend to call ourselves, we feel that we need to explain everything. If we can't see it, if we can't touch it, it doesn't exist. Although, as I've just mentioned, at the very forefront of scientific experimentation is always theory, is always what if, is blue sky thinking, is an openness to new ideas, is a desire to start from what is actually being experienced and then form theories of how to explain it, rather than the other way around, which is how people tend to approach concepts, theological concepts like the Trinity or the Spirit or those kind of things, to try and first and foremost formulate a logical approach which makes sense to us. The arrogance. To think that we can ourselves, with the brains that God created through the atoms of the stars that God created, could possibly rationalize that same God in our minds. It's a very interesting concept. How can we analyze the world through the limitations of our own brain? Interesting from a scientific perspective, but from a theological perspective, it doesn't even matter, because we're not here to explain things or rationalize things. We're here to talk of a relationship, love freely given to all people everywhere, love to be experienced like love between people. You know it when you've got it. You love it when it happens. Our elder daughter, when she was about 6 months old, had many, many hours of joy lying on her back with a helium balloon, which was in the shape of a brightly coloured parrot. Don't remember why. And this was fastened through a nice shiny ribbon to her wrist. And she would lie on the floor with this helium balloon above her. And through the movements of her arm, the parrot would inexplicably move. It would shake and twist. And in the sunlight that was coming in through the windows, the colours and the shapes and the movement were fascinating to her. And she would lie there amused for many, many moments. I'm not going to say hours because that sounds too abusive to a small child, but she enjoyed that for many, many moments. And this really is our human state, to live in the moment, to see what is around us, to take delight in all the things that we experience. And if we can but discover through selfless abandonment and surrender to the God who so desperately wants to break into our lives and show us how much God loves us, then we too can have delight. We too can simply step back and smile with joy at the glorious world that is around us and the infinite possibility of all those brothers and sisters with their own joys and sadnesses, their own weaknesses and strengths, their own gifts and talents. It's a rich, vibrant, diverse, and wonderfully complex world. And our opportunity is to live within it, is to experience it day by day, and to learn to accept through what we see rather than what we can explain that God is with us always and everywhere, and that God loves us and always, always will.